manju shi ye, nama zo shi ye, nama o dama shi ye so ha. O namo manju shi ye, nama zo shi ye, nama o dama shi ye so ha. O namo manju shi ye, nama zo shi ye, nama o dama shi ye so ha. Togi chona la janjo bando dandi kyasu chi dogi chunye gibe tona ki dola benje sangi chuba isho chedan togi chona la janjo bando dandi kyasu chi dogi chunye gibe tona ki dola benje sangi chuba isho chedan togi chona la janjo bando dandi kyasu chi dogi chunye gibe tona ki dola benje sangi rupa isho yege joshe me doja virali sheni de kembadi sanje jino me de uwaye doge nanda jina jiva isho yeda muro rana me nala kandiya taya emi
나 너무 동아리는 시제되다 탕 제사미 친디 만원 시가빈 좀 켜다니 마마지도 지점은 마시고 담좀 잡아니 진짜지 만원 대원대저 남도 보고 지금 있는 것이 요한 대가 기점도 진짜지 만원 내지 피서서보다 좀 제가 주지 제가 다시어 대다시는 뭐만 신경을 쓰는 sometimes 샤보고요.
All sentient beings have been our mothers, and all sentient beings have been our mothers for numberless times. They are as kind as our mothers of this life. Even though all kind mothers sentient beings want happiness and do not want even a small suffering, however, due to not knowing the objects of abandonment and the adoption properly, they create a karma that bring forth the result of suffering only. In our mind, sincerely generate loving kindness towards all kind mother sentient beings, thinking, how nice if all kind mother sentient beings had happiness. May all kind mother sentient beings have happiness. I will cause all kind mother sentient beings to have happiness. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
이제 만드는 저 고선 좀 집이 좀 타라 참 저 지지 저 다비쇼 대다시리 원만한 신지라도 이제 뭐이
Thanks, we cultivate compassion towards all suffering mother sentient beings, thinking, how nice if 3 doors of all suffering mother sentient beings were free of all adversities. May 3 doors of all suffering mother sentient beings be free of all adversities. I will cause 3 doors of all suffering mother sentient beings to be free of all adversities. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
이제 동화 지나서 이제 되다 탕 지금 거하다는 소그 동화 중에 쓰다 보고도 게 얘랑라 빠져 대디니가 양다가도 상지지 공부하는 게 니바도 쓰라 해서 양다가도 상지라 이 이제 탕지지는 상지지 공부하는 거지 지금 이제 더 봐샤오 장주시 생각했어.
Next week, cultivate bodhicitta. First, we ask ourselves who should take the responsibility to free all sentient beings from the sufferings of lower realms and of samsara. I should take the responsibility to free all sentient beings from the sufferings of samsara and of lower realms. But I do not have the ability to do so now. Only those who have achieved the perfect complete enlightenment have the ability to do so. Therefore, for the sake of all sentient beings, by all means, I want to become Buddha.
第一就是甚至短期的上就恐怕都把小那边没是工作吧的，让给你个第一就用说这边那边进去少的，那去当街上已经没这个东帮的，让给谁说记得去天当的上就是让给你个第一点的，多几个比这个比那边进的，就上当就是的，感觉那就会生气。
Next, we cultivate all-encompassing yoga mind, or aspiring conventional bodhicitta thinking. For the sake of all sentient beings, I want to become Buddha. These transform into a perfect mundis at one's heart. And our ultimate of bodhicitta, which is one's mind becoming in one taste with emptiness, that all phenomena are lacking of inherent existence. These transform into a wide five-pronged vajra on top of the mundis. Next, we meditate on emptiness, that I neither exist intrinsically one with, nor intrinsically different from the aggregates. Thus, I do not exist intrinsically. Set motivation. For the sake of all sentient beings, I want to become Buddha. For this purpose, I'm going to receive the commentary on holy teaching and practice accordingly in order to benefit sentient beings.
We are thank you.
Today, I'm going to start with effort, the seventh virtuous mental factor. So according to Compendium of Knowledge, what is effort? It is a mind that is enthusiastic in regard to armoring, application, non-inferiority, or also called non-discouragement, irreversibility, and non-complacency. It has the functions of fulfilling and completing the class of virtue. Yeah, so to identify the nature of effort, in brief, effort is a mind that is enthusiastic about virtue. So the mind that is enthusiastic about virtue is effort. Yeah, so and this enthusiastic mind, this enthusiastic mind or effort about virtue, then is necessary for a small capable being, for medium capable being, and for great capable being. And in the context of great capable being, this enthusiastic mind, or this mind enthusiastic about working for the sake of sentient beings. So this enthusiastic mind only found in the context of great capable being, and you cannot find this in small and medium capable being. Yeah. So basically, according to Vasubandhu, then what is effort? Then is antidote to laziness. So effort is an antidote for laziness. Then also engaging in the bodhisattva is also quoted here and to explain what is effort. So basically, effort is a mind that is enthusiastic about virtue. So, and every kind of striving is called making effort in today's world, or like every kind of effort, every kind of endeavor or exertion. Then in nowadays world, they are calling it making effort. However, this is for the sake of this life alone. So, like for example, you put effort in farming, then this effort itself is not the effort in this context. In other words, it's not the joyous effort that we are studying right now. So, because the effort is thought to be enthusiasm for virtue, and the exertions for the affairs of this life is the discordant class of effort. This is the reason why the usual effort or usual endeavor that we put in works and career, etc., is not effort. It's not the effort that we are studying right now, because they are the discordant class of effort. Yeah, so according to Lamrim, then there are three types of effort are mentioned: effort of armoring, effort of gathering virtuous qualities, and effort of enacting the welfare of sentient beings. And according to Compendium of Knowledge, then it mentions 5 types. So effort of armoring, effort of application, effort of non-inferiority, in other words, is effort of non-discouragement, effort of irreversibility, and effort of non-complacency. So in other words, it's effort of not regarding as enough.
nyamdi tendi toyo na ten nyawala sinji jigi ten duya chida kawa ja deba ina dela gawa da tuwa chiwa maso kwa cha siwa maso pe misegi da dijeshu tuwa.
So the effort of armoring, basically is like for the sake of even just one sentient beings, then for achieving the liberations, nirvana, and the state of enlightenment, even if one have to stay in hell for 100 eons, then the one endowed with this effort of armoring happily go there.
我当然说，过去针对这个被哈正被针对一把张马车把被针对的把哈正被修钱么修抓不起来的话，但被国家来下个的国家说我说知道没的，弄了说把等这一边说过了，那嘛对我说国家的差心的对的话，我说的话，说过了给解码退了，我的电脑线等的针对的等的过去的针对说电脑不就说不就了有吧伊呢？他现那一的来了的看的伊那个你话当头嘛的时候的，所以说给小了把就头嘛的时候的，等的针对等的有吧伊呢，是吧？过去针对等的有吧伊呢？但那一的来了看的伊呢，被早你电网都头嘛的时候，
So this effort of armoring then itself is an effort, and is a very strong kind of effort. So like in the usual way, when we talk about wearing armors, the armors protect us from the harm of from knife, gun, etc. Right? So such a strong protections of effort. So if we have this strong effort in our mind stream, then we are unable to be. Then we will become firm enough, strong enough, not to be diverted by distractions and laziness.
他的是就是的起的话，但你把注意责任的了话，但你把注意责任了，就要娘子来嘛呢，先做啊，现在得下了话，就要娘子来嘛呢，先做啊去。
And the second type is the effort of application, and it is a mind that is enthusiastic when engaging in practice through application.
他对了讲到大学的学是你了很多啊，就是对了大学的学是讲大学的学是我说到第步去拍卡都上了当第步学的，我说学是话的托马三百给之类的，托马本来三百上我头那边有那里就读个是第一个是之类的学之类是吧？三百给之类的学之类是吧？
托马给为之类的。
哦，托马三百的边给我之类的，托马三百的话。Thomas Samba给针对讲到技术针对是
Thomas Samba 给为针对的
哦 Thomas 被我是 Samba 的等给小人就说 Thomas Samba 有了第一个就针对的技术针对是是吧我的技术针对的是但 Thomas 的你就把嘛这但我做人就满出去把针对的这个是但大学针对是大学针对是看到我做把你给你把你说的针对看看大学针对是吧我的然后针对科学针对到底我现在他们被上路那个是针对的这些中医啥第一个是针对的话上边针对的结构啥第一个是针对的科学针对电力说的给今年嘛大头被准备先给我的针对的大学针对些我的到底我个让这上路当地我是吧
And is of two types, constant applications and respectful applications. So respectful application, in other words, is devoted applications or intense applications. So they are a different translation. So we use respectful applications. So respectful applications and constant applications, then as I will explain in a very easy way for us to understand. So respectful applications is the first moments of having a thought that I want to put effort in doing something. So respectful application is the first moment of having a thought of putting effort in doing something. And then the second moment onwards that I will put effort in doing it, that you always have this effort, want to do something, then that is constant applications. The first moment is respectful applications. The second moment onwards of putting effort, then is constant application.
Gyel-tsen ju pa na ta dan dai de ta ba kha la ni na do sen shum ba ma je bi to wa ti de wa ta kan da de so da ma ji lu bi le de kha ti so na ba ji cha de to wa mo wo yi ju se wa de gyel na da gyel kan di ji lai na ju pa na de dan dai de ta ba kha la ni na do sen shum ba de ma je ba sen mo shum ba ga wa na to wa ji ni wo de de wa
So the third one is the effort of non-inferiority or the effort of non-discouragement. So it is a generations of enthusiasm when engaging in virtue without the mind being discouraged, thinking how could one such as I do this? So this effort of non-inferiority is the main as it mainly counteracts the laziness of low esteem or the laziness of discouragement or lack of confidence. So yeah, so it's the main one to counteract this type of laziness. So if we have this effort of non-inferiority, then we will not we will not get discouraged by thinking how could I do that and etc. Instead, you happily engage in the virtue.
ngazu jili bile lo so de pe ngara pe de du tu ma de che tu ma ka che tu so da ngazu pe se shung ba chen de ji wa o de jili bile lo ro jili bile lo ta de lo zo mo go bi zhe de zo lu du wa
Yeah, so if we are under the power of laziness, of low esteem or a discouragement, then we will get discouraged by thinking, how could I do that? Or I'm not good. I can't do that. I cannot do this and etc. So this type of effort of non-inferiority mainly counteract this kind of laziness.
da shiba de mo do bi zhe de da shiba mo do bi zhe de da gi sha wa lan ju bi se kan da jin he ji ju mo du ba sing ba do wa shi ba sing ba do an ta shi ba shi ba oh de mo do bi zhe de wa.
And the number 4 is the effort of irreversibility, and is an accomplished mental enthusiasm such as that one cannot be diverted by other circumstances at the time of engaging in virtuous activities.
다 간다 모두 비춘지 세워는 가서 전주 뒤에 땡보다고 차워래. 가서 배 소소가 기 샤와라 야고 지토 배제 전주 제대로 해나. 다 현대 지게 배 도면바 지게 배네 샤완들라 존나 인데 간다 준세 따나라고 한다. 뭔가 마보 단이 인디 말해서 가리 라바이나 소소 모두 비춘지 세워다. 근데 전주 좀 필요하다 좀 내미도서 레바 시했다. 간다. 야부시니. 이 순대 지기나 배 도면바 간디지나 이 간다 dindichuri gi shawar dubala pe pachi chetugo maris do tugo maris wa mongo modo tsini.
And this effort of irreversibility is a very firm, is a very stable kind of effort. So and you already know the benefits of effort, and you also know that this effort it brings only good qualities. So you know it very well. Then your effort becomes very stable, very firm. And if there are bad friends trying to persuade you to do something else and not to put effort in, etc., then you will not be diverted to something else. So you remain very firm without being changed by those bad friends or diverted by those bad friends.
아무도 베절이나 윤디 단지 양의 더하기도 고뇌군도 패로 그래서 가서 전주도 띵고 차는 쓰려고 와. 모두 베절이 요 사이신이라고 와. 다른 게 지라 윤디데 배 주제 까마 동갈 배 윤디 고뇌군도 패로 그래서 와.
So just like in the quotation it says, if you have effort, then your excellent qualities will increase like the waxing moon.
다른 거 초보 문제를 좀 들다.
And the number 5 is the effort of non-complacency.
초보 문제 있어도 개와 중세 단지 초보 문제가 고민이 인데 고민이 쳐봐 소위 쳐든 내봐. 리로와 개와 중세 단지 될 초보 문제 봐. 윤디 고마야 지치의 양자 문제는 왜 저지와.
So the effort of non-complacency is exertion that doesn't just rest complacent with some trifling virtue but seeks higher qualities. So it's an effort that do not regard a very small virtue as enough, but instead continue to put effort in seeking higher quality.
당연히 가시 배 인데 나래 다시 배 들라 배단 리슨 사배 대 초반 진바데 다 연대라고 이나 가서 초반 진야마 연대세와는 탑에야 군에 군도 다른 배 자침부 땡 사고 시고 공패 놓아이 요아 성장 먼저 초반 진야요 말에 먼저 배 아무 네티지 나나시 네티지 손나도나 데 리스 초반 진야요 말와 배 대지 네티지 용나 배 대지 들라 초반 먼저 봐 네티지 돈나 데라 초반 먼저 봐 네티지 공나 데라 초반 먼저 봐 네티 다치 먹으러라 네티 다치 버터잖아 단디 초반 먼저 봐야 전지 디바치 나라 야시니 배 사줄 하나를 봐 기리야 초반 먼저 타마시 봐 간다 초반 진야요 말해서 먼저 윤디 또 윤디 디라 지어라 와 데라 초시 초반 진야요 말해로 와.
So in general, when we talk about being content, then when we come to this this context, talking about how to develop good qualities, then we shouldn't be content with just one good qualities that are developing our mind stream. So we should not regard it as enough. Instead, we should continue to put effort in develop more and higher qualities. So, like for example, if a person first entered the path of hearers, then he entered the path of accumulations, then he shouldn't be just satisfied with the realizations of the path of accumulations, and instead this person should continue to put effort in achieving a higher path. So the path of preparation, the path of seeing, the path of meditation, the path of no more learning. So then this person become arhats already, and he shouldn't be contented with the achievement of arhat also, and he should continue to put effort in achieving the path and grounds of the Maya.
But the big kitchen boring also in the chopa minister than also pay dodo bashigina la tiba chimbole jabina and langa sanji kumalan duwa yola sona jona tona gona teaching mola so this sanji saldo mola sevadi dan also pay shabana sona da boji tone this also with chopan zibaina the chopan zibaina that's the one in the lang commercial pachi to pachi chewer mother Indian pego mother Indian pia chewer mother lang comagi topa chewa pachi chewer the pachi chiamato pinto mare roa da tiji sona tona dan reason the chopan in the zhonggu de sa de li de la pe cho shujinzi de chinda pe topa comabs jila chewa pachi chewer sti ha ko chewa dodo dirda mindina china page yoba nashi mash dodo nashi pasone to share irwa.
Yeah, so to summarize the efforts of non-complacency, so we shouldn't be complacent, or we shouldn't be satisfied with good qualities. So if one have already entered the first path of the vehicle of respective vehicles, then you should continue to put effort in achieving a higher path until you achieve the highest path, the path of no more learning, which is the state of enlightenment. So if a person being content with the achievement of path, with the realizations of path of accumulations, then just thinking that, oh, I have already achieved the path of accumulations already, I mean, it is enough for me, so I don't have to continue to put effort. So this itself, this complacency will become an obstacle for one to achieve higher path.
O dijiro ta nga zo zundu be yunde koma jebala pena yunde na chi jewa kan yidela choba jina yunde koma jala pachi jeba shi ta tande choshi jebosina ta nyo la so ba tendel be shawa anjiri bi shawa zola be hajan be soso bi choshi yona ya ta kanda ro choshi yona ya choshi jebo야 jida je 먹어야 돼 jeba shi wa 조시 제 고사들 조시 제 마시바지 조시 제 먹으셔들 조시 제바이나 나때 노조 마지바 노조 자원이 마지바 저기 다 된다고 쳐놓고 노조 제 많은 노조 시대 제 많은 게이나 당안 접배 좀 첨벌로 노조 제게 손다 다 조시 제고야 돼 가르래도 조시 제 먹어야 돼 가르래도 어디 제바시보다 이 제바시는 너무 내지 노조 제바도 고치고 그러다 그래서 노조 제는 내가 하고 요러와 다 조시 지나가서 내려서 내망이 뭐지 조시 봐서 다 간다 내려서 봐서 배 조시 지야 돼 미세시 그런 말다 맞아 예 지요 맞아 제마 다 리시시 하피 리시시 지요 다도 시험 뭐 좋아 맞아 조시 지야 돼 저렇게 빼야 버려와 내려서 봐도 저렇게 조시 지야 돼 빼야 버려 자 조시 지고야 돼 제 먹어야 돼 제봐야 뭐 시행도 좋아.
Yeah, so we are studying great texts, so we must understand when we come to this word content or satisfaction, then we have to understand with something that we have to satisfy, with something that we shouldn't be satisfied or contented. So with those we shouldn't be satisfied or contented is quality, good qualities. So if we were to satisfy with the good qualities that we develop, then it will become the obstacles for us to develop higher or greater good qualities. So with regard to these, then we shouldn't be satisfied. And Yet we need to be satisfied with something else also. So when we come to desirable objects and when we come to worldly activities, then we must have contentment. So when we since we are studying Greek text, then we must we must understand. So with regard to what object, then we must be satisfied and we must not be satisfied. Then only serve the purpose of studying Greek text.
다들 전주적인 데만 망보지 신도 가서 전주가 되는 피해에 납침받더니 다 이제 망보지 배 지시로 다들 사마리는 시고는 와 다들 지시고야만도 간다 전주서는 가서 다다바 빠디 다다가 고만지 봐라 연대 말이 전주 전도 히스와 연대 수속기가 똑바로 말이 감리 찍은 사망 아주 전주라 되는 연구를 해서 전주기 지스와 해서와 어떤 전주디 야부 여바인다 다시 공도 시와 나시 다 전주 여바이나 내가 간다 수속에 강배 타투 두고야 돼 단다 가리는 사만 몇서 두두를 해서 와 두두 가시는 지휘인 방에서 신의까지 내야 두당 지휘인 방 가서 지휘서 와 뭐데 다 전주 두 스케치를 다른 다 쇼먹고 버티러 전주 도도 두시로 와.
So in brief, so entire class of virtue is contingent upon effort. So all achievements of the class of virtue depends on effort. So previously I also talked about in order to achieve calm abiding, then one part of it is effort. So effort is necessary for oneself, for one to achieve calm abiding. So since I have already mentioned about it, I'm not going to talk about it again.
당어서 제바 시장이더와 제바 시장이 바꾼데 신이 좀 아까 있나서 leader sinji ningi leji jinji bishir the leader sin les ruase edishi uda tambu shijang chidrwa.
So the rest then is about the benefits of effort. So you read it and you understand. So now I'll go to the next virtuous mental factor, which is pliancy.
다 간다 시장 세워도 지바 탄지 시 레진 세다 들이스와 시장 시레디어다 다 간다 시장 세워도 지바 탄지 시 레진.
So according to Compendium of Knowledge, what is pliancy? It is a serviceability of body and mind due to severing the continuum of unbearable states or the negative tendency. So unbearable states of body and mind or negative tendency of body and mind. And its function is to eliminate all obscurations.
다 간다 세계 미발라 치탄 데바 인도 코드루이 다 라진 조바시 리더 신지 닝이레지 진지비 리바스 다 간다 데리와 리세 레스로마 다 리세 시장도 더바이나 가서 리세 레스로마 차베스 다 데리와.
So pliancy is a knower that deposits and imprints so that the mind can be applied or directed at wish to a virtuous object of observation, and it cuts the continuum of unfavorable states or the negative tendency of body and mind. So in brief, when we talk about pliancy, it is a serviceable body and mind.
다 간다 리세 레룬도 레스로와서 된다가 레스로와서 된다 레스로와 리세 레스로와서 와데 다 간다 데레 레스로 된다 리더 세 개월을 기탄 데데 수도 고토와시 리세 개월을 기탄 데데 그 두가지 리세 세진 거 간다 시장 통으로와 리더 세 개월을 기탄 데데 다랑파 내가 나지 된디게 내가 그 두가지 이거 간다로와.
When pliancy is divided, then it's of two types: physical pliancy and mental pliancy. So basically, when we talk about physical and mental pliancy, it is a serviceability of the mind that enables one to direct one's body or mind to a virtuous object at will. So that is physical or mental pliancy.
다 간다 다시 공도 받으러와 시장 세워디 간다 다 리신 레스 중앙시로 레스롱이 되어지로와 간다 리세 개월아 주단 되는 것도 되지로와 다 가르스나 지바 탄지시 레지스 라본도 시장 세워들 다시 공도 쉬러와 지바 탄지시 레지스 다 지바 탄지시 레지스와다 다 간다 리진닝이래 생진닝이래 대파 제바시기 시래 지바지 리진지레스로와 지바 탄지시 레지스나 다 리진닝이래 생진닝이래 시장 도의 리진닝이래 생진닝이래 조바지는 거와 or the
And plan C is, so it has the functions of eliminating all obscurations, right? So what it means is because plan C able to cut the negative tendency or unfavorable states of body and mind. So therefore, its function is to eliminate all obscurations.
我的这说讲的理解念眼来的说把些个你把有你把修全部的那个嘞，甚至念眼来把些个你把修全部的那个嘞也是我，他讲的西藏头发一呢，当俺说南极理解念眼来说的，就当俺说的所以来讲到，是吧？理解念眼来说，就当俺说的说了，想这个嘞，俺个人他妈是个去做，理解不呢说起吧，老师说的时候讲到理解念眼来差的不是。 理解那个差不多啊，但对嘛，这讲的，俺说，就当把这边呢，俺说被理的，实际上头的理的讲的第二个了，但对我两个话就那，他们对起了，他讲的适当都起了。
So when one achieve plan C, then it able to cut, it is able to cut the negative tendency or unfavorable states of body and mind. So the negative tendency or unfavorable states of body, for example, physically killing or harming other sentient beings, and verbally telling lies, telling divisive speech, etc. Those are the negative tendency of body.
当俺说卡杜西呢，理解那个嘞，这得把卡杜西所说的生活当中呢，但理解了一些结果差不，俺是就啊，把理结果差不被那个被制作老中去结果呢，被睫毛头被理下降被尿道这里掐一下，俺说是吧？理结果差不理解了一下，我但是说理解不说怕，俺他怕谁的，俺是西藏头是吧？但是说把谁的，但理别是你大妈哪些被别个你大妈哪些被养啊？ 가만히나 파 내가 가르쳐잖아 파 까니 생각 출면봐 소단에시 로아 리 양보 들이 차는 거 간다 리 시장 토들어와 리 토리 간다도 차는 거서 파다 리 닝이래서다 리지래자 좋아다 다 진짜 처음에 다 이거도 쉬인봐 뭐다도 좀 안보 열어와.
Yeah. So in brief, when we talk about the negative tendency or unfavorable states of body, so it is a heaviness of the body when we want to engage in virtuous activities, like for example, study, when we want to read a text, etc. Then the heaviness of the body that that unwilling to engage in that activities, then that is negative tendency of body. So by achieving a plan C, then the body becomes light, like here, buoyant and light, and able to engage in those activities. Do not have that heaviness.
Development 태송세 나도 서로 간다 아토스 디방하다 딱 되버려 답서 맞아 뭉치려 와 디방하다 히리나 열어 히리나로 열어 간다 되게 아
디방하리 가리
네 그바단 제바 그바단 제바 네세다 무바 네세다 무바 네세다 무바 니다 데반 dim대차 대방들차 어니든 대차 대태송 대방은 dim바스들이
대총 대총 연하게지라
다 디방아서 가서 장가스 당지래 네 간다 그바든 제반이가 지도 장가스 놓고 겐지니까 지도 니도 문이 지도 장가스 놓고 와 니도 문이 지도 장가스 놓고
그래서
그바든 제반이
그바로
그바다 라고다 가는
거
그바
Gyoba, nursing Mokpa Nidanyamdu, and it did Chachi, and it did some Jirai.
Oh, that is a Tanga de Kanda, Gopa and Japan Tangachi. Winji Tangachi, need the moon in the Tangachi. They're not on that.
That's all. Anything has a Japan, Jibanga, Nicola.
That Dick and the singing in it, sitting in it, chair. That is the one singing in it, so saving you watching the Resibura, station that told. Junchi as the singing in the legion in Junchi, Junchi, all of that, singing in the ditch.
So that was about the negative tendency of body, and now the negative tendency of mind. And in Letter to a Friend by Nagarjuna, so he mentions 5 types of obscurations. The first one is excitement, and the second, the first one is excitement and regret. So list together so as one. So excitement and regret, one. The second one is harmful intentions. The third one is lethargy and sleep. Lethargy and sleep. And the fourth one is attachment. And the fifth one is doubt. So these are the negative tendency of mind. So by achieving the pliancy, you're able to cut the continuum of the physical and also the mental negative tendency. So physical pliancy on the text, it says, through the power of meditative concentration, unserviceability of the body is purified, whereupon the body is buoyant and light like a ball of cotton and can be applied to virtuous activity according to one's wish. Yeah, so this pliancy we will study in depth when we come abiding in Lamrim. Then we will study that. So basically, when we talk about physical pliancy, so physical pliancy is a pleasant contact of the body. So it's a pleasant physical contact, and it is not a mental factor. And mental pliancy is such that through the power of meditative concentration, the mind becomes free of unserviceability, whereupon it becomes amenable to application to an object of observation without hindrance. So we will study pliancy in depth in Lamrim class. So basically, when we talk about this pliancy is related to calm abiding. So when one achieve calm abiding, then we achieve pliancy as well. So and then when we talk about achieving calm abiding, the way to achieve calm abiding, then we have to talk about the 9 mental states or the 9 mental abidings. So everything, all these, then we will talk about. We will talk in Lamrim class. So according to Lama Tsongkhapa in his Song of Experience says, concentration is a king ruling the mind. When placed in it, the mind is as immovable as the king of mountains. When employed, it engages all virtuous objects of observation and induces the great list of serviceable body and mind. So this concentration, or in particular this calm abiding with pliancy, then is like a king. It is like a king ruling the mind. That it gives the power to whoever wants to meditate on emptiness, then it empower it, and it able to induce wisdom. Because by empower the meditations on emptiness, then you're able to induce wisdom. So, and it's also very powerful to eliminate the negative tendency of body and mind, as mentioned just now. Next is conscientiousness. So according to the Compendium of Knowledge, the nature of conscientiousness is a cultivation of virtuous qualities within abiding in non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance, as well as effort, and guards the mind against contaminations. So this is conscientiousness. So it is an awareness that accomplishes virtue within abiding in effort without coming under the influence of afflictions, and it guards the mind against contaminations. So by having conscientiousness, then we will not fall. By having conscientiousness, then it guards our mind from falling under the influence of afflictions, and it guards the mind against contaminations. So basically, if we have this conscientiousness, then our mind will not fall under the control influence of discordant class. So in this context, the mind referring to the conscientiousness, if we have this, then the mind will not fall under the influence of discordant class, and discordant class referring to non-conscientiousness. And according to Bodhisattva grounds, it mentions 5 types: conscientiousness with respect to the former, the latter, the middle, prior to activity, and of concordant application.
That is the best you say, give each our did it by yourself. Young say the gay shall can do it till show the did do bullets, so your mother Medisho army bashol Pama Tanki. What did it Cantarwa?
So this conscientiousness is guiding our mind or holding our mind to the virtuous activities. So whatever virtuous activities that we want to do, and this conscientiousness hold our mind and set it on the virtuous activities without letting it go to the discordant class of the discordant class, which is the non-conscientiousness. And when we talk about guarding morality, so when we always talk about keep our morality or guard our morality, right? There are three important factors. So the first one is mindfulness, second one is vigilance, and the third one is conscientiousness. So these three are needed for one to guard our morality properly. Yeah. So conscientiousness with respect to the former, so our correction, the corrections of past faults in accordance with the Dharma. So the corrections of past faults referring to those non-virtuous activities that we have done in the past. Then is the corrections of those past negativities in accordance with the Dharma. Is the conscientiousness with respect to the former.
That mongi tisro de shimin tasindwa. That shimin tasderda mongi tishiroa. That mongi tisia tendiroa magi shawala kanda nju mujinge sense tangedre kanda bayoderwa. Mongi tisro ndebi tis kanda magi shawa che chibadul ngaza shiji che chaso bayodirwa. De shiji chebada. Mongi tisa de magi shawala zawani ne pandro mujinge sense tangedre. Wa odere.
So conscientiousness with respect to the latter is an earnest intention to do so in the future. So with regard to those past negative activities that we have done, then we already do a corrections on it. Then with respect to the latter, with respect to the future, then we have an earnest intentions not to do it in the future, not to do those negative activities in the future.
Tade yijin tada nema de lugundwa. Tade data lugundwa. Data ya jeba meba susu gi shawa kan du de jeba meba sin de nema ju pata. Daro sin de nema ju machi. Ayi chudre.
And conscientiousness with respect to the middle is doing so without forgetfulness in the present. So the first one is in the past, the second one is in the future, and the third one is in the present. So one, our mind set on doing the virtuous activities without forgetting it.
Dash shiba de ngani shawa ta chindoa. Oda didre be ngama penga so bayo nijinta shiminta yijinta se so rosarwa. Oda tega nanshin se borwa. De na shawa pe gi sha kandi jobaina danda tegara mentine jeba. Mentine be sentima. Mentine ngama be roa be ndebi magi shawala be ngaso shijini jwa nibi bayo. Debe mongba na pena domba meshiba tegara ni to bachi. De dada wala be tegara be sin youtube lubachi wo dendi sin rado dimati. Shiba de dere sin rado dine. Wo tega chi yesa that bayo derwa.
So the fourth one is the conscientiousness prior to activity. So it's a tightening of the mind, thinking how wonderful it would be if I could behave and abide in ways such that faults do not arise. So it's related to the previous three kinds of conscientiousness. So the past negativities and the action, and not to do it in the future, and do not forget the virtuous activities that you want to do. So the placement of the mind, or the mind set on doing the virtuous activities. So this tightening of the mind is a mind focused in relation to these three.
대다 지지 내고 뭐세 대라 대다 진체바 ngama 바이오 템바 나시티 진체바 미바르바 진체베바 이 바이오 템바 데리 와.
So the conscientiousness of concordant application, in dependence on that, behaving and abiding accordingly. So basically, it means continuously to abide, continuously to rely on conscientiousness.
다 바이오 템스와 디칸다 실리 디칸이었나 지딘다 지딘인데 빌라다 지딘인데 빌라 강가 인디 비슨 좀 탄진도 비데 대시비 대지그래 에세와 상아 탄지비지 자와 탄지 자와 힘도 개침부 주리에서 다 상아 탄지 길에 제가 저와 배 대신게 배 진진게 야슈지리에서 다들로도와 바이오서도와 연구물을 두고 바이오 디지기 아반면 치 미스토비 때까지 대인의 취직기의 취 강가 폐화시 받아 로아 어디 지그레스 다 연구물을 두고 들고 장도 된다 되는 우리 로아.
And the functions of conscientiousness is thoroughly completing and fully establishing all mundane and supramundane success. So, yeah. So since has been taught that it has the functions of acting as a support for achieving all mundane and supramundane success, it is of utmost importance as the roots of all paths and grounds. So this conscientiousness is the conditions that enable one to develop path and ground, to develop the realizations of path and ground in one's mind stream. So thus, the protector Nagarjuna also says in his letter to a friend, the Muni taught that conscientiousness is the source of the nectar, and non-conscientiousness is the source of death. Is that of death, or is the source of the death? And therefore, for the sake of enhancing your virtuous qualities, respectfully always be conscientious. So, give us time, give us time. Yeah, so the next one is equanimity. Yeah. So what is equanimity? It is a discordance with afflictive states and evenness of mind and a dwelling in a natural state. A dwelling in a natural state, in other words, is the stillness of mind and a spontaneous abiding based on non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance, and as well as effort. So this, the discordance with afflictive states and evenness, stillness, and spontaneous abiding are the quality or the attributes of equanimity. So in general, there are three types of equanimity. So the equanimity of applications or the compositional equanimity. So the first one is equanimity of application or compositional activity. Compositional equanimity. And the second one is equanimity, which is feeling, and the third one is immeasurable equanimity. So in general, when we talk about equanimity, then it is equal. Yeah, so it refers to being equal. Yeah, so di kasati tangyum right? Yeah, so equanimity is a mental factor that equally yeah, sorry. Yeah, so equanimity is a mental factor that equally engage its object by its power. So yeah, so equanimity is a mental factors that by its own power engage equally with its object. So that is equanimity. So yeah, these are the three types of equanimity of compositional equanimity, the first one, and equanimity which is feeling and immeasurable equanimity. Yeah, and equanimity, which is feeling, is the feeling that experience neither pleasant nor suffering. Because the chadam meba the same yomba, the same yomda or same. Yeah. So immeasurable equanimity is the equanimity without attachment or hatred to the beloved one or the beloved one or the enemies in relation to immeasurable sentient beings. So it is an equanimity without attachment and hatred to the beloved, the close ones, or the enemies in relation to numberless sentient beings or immeasurable sentient beings. As what is compositional equanimity or equanimity of application? So when we study Dharma, then say one day then we study very hard, then the next day then we relax, then the next day then we study very hard, and the next day we relax. Then that is not equanimity of application or compositional activity. So compositional equanimity is when you study, then you study continuously and equally. Then that is equanimity of application or compositional equanimity. Yeah, so when we practice the 7 cause and effect, then this equanimity is the first one. Yeah. So when we talk about the 7 cause and effect, then this equanimity is mentioned that we have to first generate equanimity before we engage the 7 cause and effect.
세 고바스카 와 대신 지지 비딩이 제가 내가 레고와 세네 고바도 토데 가서 대신 내가 베스 세 당뇨 쉬고 참는 거 예세고 아무 가서 베 야리바 고는 베 당뇨 용마들이 베 신화 레오서 들 카티 지자야 고바 레오서 들 카티 지자 아 근데 베 카티 자시간 로 야리바기 다 메기 세네 고바 토르디 다 대가 레오를 다베 semba hujabu marda ka shingwa da geba khora da rangi ji dega lese de tape kanda shingwa guba ne ba maywa se nyombo so sar kanda rowa ta dega da ngazo de pi nyemu ba pang chocho da ba cha sare pang chocho da rowa ta kiji nimba da ngazo te shine thon ro rowa sine guba de kiji nimba shine thon ro rowa wo dega le de te ngazo sempe tanyo the Senongo Ocean de Peshima, the Gopa and Dip Leo, the Katicha, the sing Mashuting Marisor. Take a Senongo.
Kuwait Kijima in addition to your
Togola.
As well in the Kuwait and the Jinguki and the Niebo de Tingo.
Oh, that's it. She want the Gopa Niebo Tingo. That's it. Hello, Chasarello.
Người tôi trang ăn xin thâu rồi căn mỗi căn tôi trang ăn xin thâu à mỗi người
yeah, so and the functions of equanimity is specified as not allowing an opportunity for afflictions, because upon attaining the ninth mental state, the manifest afflictions of the desire realms are easily overcome, and in particular, laxity and excitement or excitation do not arise during meditative equipoise. So at first, when we try to cultivate the calm abiding, when we try to meditate, then our mind is not in equipoise, it's not in equanimity, because when laxity arises, then we have to counteract it, and when excitement arises, then we have to counteract it. So our mind is not in equanimity. So when we continue to meditate, then when we reach the ninth mental stage or the ninth mental abiding, then at that point we can relax our mind. So our mind is at ease without applying antidotes, without putting effort in applying antidotes to laxity and excitement. So at that point, our mind is in equanimity. So at the second moment of the ninth mental state, then one achieve calm abiding.
So
that is about equanimity. Next one is non-harmfulness. So what is non-harmfulness? It is a mind of compassion or a compassionate mind, and belongs to the category of non-hatred. So is involved with non-hatred. In other words, it belongs to the category of non-hatred.
Number Tape Dunga Chinawa in and Pe Kandi Susola never chinkish leva in and Kandina Telepe Kanda Nitsewa Ninji King and Titela Setu Geshua, Kandin Kangi Kandina Setu Geshua, number
So non-harmfulness is a patience that, lacking malice, observes suffering sentient beings, thinking may they be free of that suffering. This abandoning harm to sentient beings, or non-harmfulness, is the essence of the meaning of this concordant scriptures. So when we talk about non-harmfulness, non-harmfulness is a kind of patience motivated by compassion that abandon harmful actions to other sentient beings.
That's in Chile, Nessipo, the national one, Mazuraju, and one Matus Chevalier, Mazuchu, Tuyak, Den Lodua, the each one Chisaji, because Jay Timber Kila never see the Chibuga, Chila Socha, de never my chip, the Kanda, Mazu Chupi Tangala, Chusas and Mazo, 데 고르스 비지 당고레스 고 로아 다 단다 이나 맞아 메신기 사제데 데 신지라 네버 치야마 페이지 토사마라 데 소라 맞아 메신을 고 미리 지오디 간다 추르 자마스 고레디야 추르는 좀 그거 파시고 그러 다 맞아 뭐마 근도와 저 시오디 맞아 추장춘도 보지 통구나 추도즈 쪼는 왕사 내내 고서 하얀 루바이나 단 무망보 슈여바이나 축구 이제 그 뭐가 쓰이자 그러와 this is not that on the one show the chu pay tan as chang chung ma chang chi so ta dan dan shi de yo ma yo ma ro wa the chu de le with the chu chu sa ja bo re se ma chu sa ne ba pe chu tang go re se the je ga de se ga da so cha la ma ya ko chu sa ji ne de so cha bu de le chu ne rang ja pa ta ya ro wa wo de le mo dan dan me si na shi chu sa ma sa de na shi ma da
Yeah, so even the concurrent teaching in the context of bestowing a water strainer in the Vinaya procedural rite is a fine distinction of compassion. Since one must definitely turn away from harming others as well as their bases, the necessity of equipping oneself with a strainer for the sake of abandoning harm to creatures in water has been taught. So, yeah, so in Vinaya, then it talks about non-harmfulness. Yeah, so it's talking about abandoning harmful actions, abandoning harm to other sentient beings or violence to other sentient beings. So in the Vinaya text, it mentions that say when you want to drink the water, from the river, so you will boil it first, right? So if you just scoop the water and then boil it, then there are sentient beings living in the water, right? So and when you boil it, then you will kill them. So, without killing them, then not to kill them, then you have to use a water strainer. So the water strainer will filter the sentient beings from the water, and then you drink the filter. You boil the filter water. Then if you do in this way, then you will not harm the sentient beings living in the water. So nowadays, then we use water filter, right? A machine. So machines sometimes come with the functions of ultra UV light and etc. that it kills the sentient beings in the water, right? So it's not, this water strainer is not the same as the modern water filter.
다 들려 간다 가서 근데 넘버 뭐지 들려 간다 비타고 야고 지여바이나 데 계정 간디 두고나 두두브리에서 먼저 계정 위치 시대시 계정 위치 시대 시험도와 다데 사대데 계정 위치 시대 된바이 차로와 어디 차로에서 다 계정 위치 시대 동법에 시장 라면 시선도와 당보들 시장 라면 시선 당보들 지라서 당보들
Yeah. So non-harmfulness basically talks about abandoning harm to sentient beings, so violence to sentient beings. So, and then the 계종
위치 시대 된바 참 그래서 넘버
예바 메와이 넘버 미세와 데 요와이나
어
넘버 미세와 요와이나 디 가서 계종 위치 시도
계종 위치 시대 된바 다 계종 위치 시대 됐으나 그래서 계시와 가르쳐 주고나야 배tel은 이빠치보다 배치 무시로와
Yeah, so with non-harmfulness, then one will be able to practice the 4 qualities that makes one a trainee in virtue. So with the non-harmfulness, then one is able to practice the 4 qualities of a practitioner of virtue that makes one a trainee of virtue. So the first one is, even when derided, do not deride in return. In other words, is even when one is scolded, do not scold in return.
다 때문에 간다 계정 위치에 시장 사람 해서와 시장 사람 해서 treasure trust deja this some
So what are the 4 qualities that makes one a practitioner of virtue or trainee in virtue? So even when derided, do not deride in return. So in other words, is even when one is scolded, then do not scold in return. And even when someone gets angry at one, then do not get angry in return. Even when one is hit, do not hit back. Even when one's faults are exposed, do not expose others' faults.
다 단단히 대화로 딱 되버린다 알아. 단단히 간다. 다 먼저 그 넘버 맞춰와게 배 놈네 대치어 송장 다 넘버 맞춰와 세워야 가서 그 신이 생라 많이 봐. 수보라 많이 봐. 가서 로아 되게 강가도 고로와 넘버 네버 메버와 이게 리더 소 가르리나베 네버 메버치. 네버 메버 된디지 고라 넘버 맞춰와. 다 된디 고에 손상 다 히알라 메히 추히히 간디지 빵바이나 들파 레마로 바치. 로아 파 양자 파 마시 바치. 레마도 바. 레로바이나 콜 야세나 폴고로와. 그 폴라 폴고로와. 어 측간디지 컨트롤 바이나 트레자 라르모토 파라 근데 만초아치. 로아 아데 저와 빵도와. 어 뜻 대자라 마디스. 측간디지 슈바이나 들파 레마테바. 是唱的家，那上面的吃素给菌港的我为呢，为了怕全老菌都要来是马老百姓，是吧？我等这个来马这吧，是吧？那等这马这吧呢，都可跑到过了，现在那个嘛，离了那个嘛，是吧？你个那个嘛，是吧？你是那个了。
So when we talk about non-harmfulness or non-violence, basically it's not harming others' body, mind, and lives. So this is a summary of, as a very short explanations about non-harmfulness or non-violence. So, and when we talk about, and these 4 qualities that makes one a practitioner of virtue, the first one is even when one is scolded, do not scold in return, right? So if others scold you and you do not scold back, you do not scold the person back, then if you the person's do not hurt, do not feel hurt. So because if you were to scold back in unpleasant, using unpleasant words, then the person minds will feel hurt, right? So you protect the other person's mind. You do not harm others' mind by not scolding it back. And even when someone gets angry at you, then you do not get angry at them. And then even when one hit, then you do not hit it back. So if one hit you, then if you hit it back, hit the person back, then you harm others' body already, right? So and it contradicts the meaning of non-harmfulness already. So if one has non-harmfulness, then even when others hate you, you do not hit it back because you do not want to hurt or harm the other's person. And if others expose your faults, saying that you have this and that faults, you do not expose their faults in return.
다 지난 가서 개월에 주지시 다데 개월 주지도 두서와 다 개월에 주지보 대장지다도 배 리버스나 양자 지난 가서 개월에 야 나치 쉬고와 근데 개월 지지시셔와 개월 지지시 때 마치 양자 개월에 나치 나이치 요리에스로와 아까는 요리에스 지 개월에 원지 개월 리 개월 제스리 개월 원 개월
So besides the 11 virtuous mental factors that we mentioned just now, then when virtues can be divided in 5 types as well. So virtues by way of entity, by way of relation, by way of subsequent relation, by way of motivation, and by way of ultimacy.
원지 개와서다 간다 군호서 힌 군호다 인기배 고하다 배 내가 저 비샤기 샤원들이 두고 있을 거다 랑기 군호다 뭐 상호다 드릴라 마데바 그런 거 마데바 다 간다 랑니 두잔의 게임 뭐 진노기지 로아 니지가 간다 원지 개와세 로아 원지 개와세 딜레 샤크리 예스로아
개와 가서 기위 차와라 꾸와서 되다 아니지
다 군호 군을 하 많이 봤어도 그 개원들이 두고 있을 텐데 이 군호네 리지 군호라 때문에 다 hingi pe gewa dusha chi chefu ni chefu se tindi chawa chi bal tene teba mai be gewa rowa de dia teba mai be da ani du zang ji ge ngwa ro ta pe shawa ina amudi jila rowa.
So the virtues by way of entity is faith and so forth are specified as being virtues by way of entity because they are generated in the entity of virtue. So they are virtue by nature. So from their mere establishment without relying on other factors such as motivations. So like for example, I say faith themselves, then they are virtue by nature without depending on motivations, and it do not depends on others asking you to do virtue and etc. Without such factors, by itself, they themselves are virtue by nature.
Tapi ngazo pe kuno da kake matang bache sango keke matang lamsa uman pe me hum se chi tindi pe chi lo baina ta tigi gewa de tigi gewa de wa tigi gewa de ngazo kuno so ka ke la na te wa chi ro ro uman pe me hum se tindi chi tigi gewa de anda kuno la ma te ba ro man pe me chi pe tuba tang ji ge ngo tu ro chi wa wo tindi chi.
So an example is if you do not have any motivations, then you just out of a sudden we say Om Mani Padme Hum. So these establishments of virtue is established without depending on motivations, and these recitations of Om Mani Padme Hum is virtue by nature. And so this is just an example for the first type of virtue by way of entity. In virtue by way of relations are mind and mental factors that are concordant by way of the 5 similarities with the 11 faith and so forth. So an example is if the mind is virtue, if the main mind is virtue, and its concomitant mental factors are virtuous as well.
That Jason de Giwas London, they give out the gay Bachars. That's the gay Bachars, that is the good.
And the third type of virtue is virtue by way of subsequent relation. Then they are imprints of virtue, so it's really very easy to understand.
That's only give us the beginning of the letter. That was the yin of Mandia, the Guno, whatever Tosca Timuman Benos in Damaji, Shine Bang waters. That and that the begin had the woman in Mehundade. Then other point give a shadow, woman be moved out. The least chance out. The least chance they give a raw, least chance they give and mark money they pick you a kuno, give it on the raw. What they only give a shadow.
And virtues by way of motivations are, for instance, physical and verbal actions motivated by faith. For example, out of faith, one do prostrations, physically do prostrations, or one verbally recite Mani mantra. And these are the examples for virtues by way of motivations. So as compared to the first type of virtue by way of entity. So the example for this one is without any motivations, and all of a sudden one recites Om Mani Padme Hum. That recitations of Om Mani Padme Hum is an example of virtue by way of nature.
Anybody and don't be going to don't be going to taking in a shaman, taking the Tomani, Tomani, taking in a minute, Gona, the Dubatanje, Tabanji. She gave a taba. That the Tommy Zarema, Taba Zarema, women, no Maris, Marisipura Giva, the Hinis word. That is not a job at Savina, that's all of Mombasa. So that the Hinina give a Mahigo Marina. So that's a good job at Sayre. So within the Dutch within that had you the Hin Tomban Tony Hilova, the Hini Hilova. Within that, so that you stem Malora. That answer the another Tony Sewa Dirwa, the Hini Sewa Depe, Takanda, Tandamigiwari, Yeswa, Tandamigiwari, the Image, the Hini de la Pet, Yambashani, they go generally, they answer new Dupont to a shitty Dupont to the Warwa, or Digi China, Takanda, the Hinila Giwas Tower, yes, the Warwa.
So the last one is virtues by way of ultimacy, explained to be thusness or suchness. So because all obscurations will be purified if one meditates within observations of thusness. Therefore, they are designated as virtues, but are not actual virtues. So yeah, all obscurations, afflictive obscurations and obscurations to omniscience, then will be purified if one meditates on thusness. So therefore, they are designated as virtue, but it's not the actual virtue.
다 공도시비 교화 대다라 간다. 내갑지 시는 제토지 교화의 유종 교화, 닌도시비 교화, 펜도비 교화, 용선지비 교화, 님비 교화, 니와시 교화, 진진비 교화. that's 지샤우도르와.
And virtues can be again divided from the viewpoints of circumstances, and there is virtue by way of attainment at birth, virtue by way of application, virtue by way of activity directed in front, by way of benefiting, by way of bearing, by way of acting as an antidote, by way of pacifications, and by way of concordant cause.
아간다 제토지 교화서의 센터의 공부하면 되바 체랑함이 받쳐지 제장이네. 수이 되바. 되바다 들린도와 다들 가서 같이 시설하면 제토다 유중서도와.
So the virtue by way of attainment at birth, then previously we also talk about virtue acquired at birth and virtue acquired through applications. So here, referring to the first one, the virtue by way of attainment at birth is, for instance, the faith that arises through mere rebirth due to the imprints from past lives without depending on familiarization in this lifetime.
다 주의 교화의 간다들의 단다디서 가서 대상 공부 제바. 자기 신이나 간다 취년바 그러와 수속배 타바는 난디 투아지도 공제바 서로와 어디에 맞아 주의기와.
And virtue by way of application, so basically is engaging in listening to Dharma and contemplating Dharma and meditate on Dharma and listening to Dharma from the spiritual friends and to meditate in order to achieve liberations and also the state of enlightenment.
다 대지든 닌도시비 교화서도 다 닌도시비 교화서는 가서 드랍 가도 소신진딘도로 소신진딘나 와 소신진딘나 때 간다 수속배 차피와다 배 저와피와 서로와 저와피 교화 서로와.
Virtue by way of activity directed in front, so basically is in front of merit field, one do prostrations and make offerings, and those are virtue by way of activity directed in front.
단 펜도비 교화서는 가서 되지는 지시고요. 되지를 배 만서 진바당바 신체배 진바당으로와 진바당바 간다 신념부 배기 샤월이야 교화 디자배 가시 신념부 마이토리 이 샤월에 팀으로와 다 대제바 텐팀바스 요아 되시는 대제바의 배신체기 샤월이야 기아바 간다 그거 들어와 주친게 샤와기 샤와 두친게 두바냥 연애 제친 야 제도 주바 서로와 대제바
심지인데 집었다와다 근데 가서디 기회 차와라 티야기 제도 니 신념부 시바
신념부
죄바 되바로
죄바도 텐팀바 서로와 다도 소기 교합서 간다
되게 주시
펜도비 교화.
So virtue by way of benefiting is, for instance, actions such as ripening sentient beings by way of the four means of gathering disciples. So it's also one of the topic in Lamrim as well. So the four ways of gathering disciples, for example, practice giving to sentient beings and to speak pleasantly in order to guide disciples to the virtuous activities and practice according to the instructions.
다 용수집이 교화서다 용수집이 교화서 땅토다 내리기 배 대토야지다 배 두바냥래 용수 저바 제바다 가다 데려 간다와 내토다 내내 토야지들와 내토다 내내 다 내토 함이 공부다 내내들 타바로 단지지 공부하러와 다 타바로 단지지 공부 토야 될라 배 랑지림방 원이 빈주 마조지 바다가 마토지 바다 창나 용수 냥래 제바다 로와 냥래 제바다 용수집이 교화서와
남주바다
랑 용조다 다 랑 용수 줘봐라 간다 두바냥리 제바다 간다 응은도 타미다 다 니네 타바 단지면 공부 네가 토야지로와 다 니네들 타바 단지지만 니 여러와 다 니네도 하면 여러와 오데 다 간다 들라 간다 지부 송그 냥서 냥리 지르바다 레 드네 시오 용수 집이 와서 되나 로와 제부 성격 냥이 와 제부 중요가 년도 배 저도야 대치는 양수해야 돼. 다 제부 리드나 타바트 대치다. 제부 제모이나 니레 문님이 냠데 토야치. 오 대리 랑용조를 배 용선집이 겨와서 랑용조를 배 냥리시비 겨와서 기저 시오도와 제부 천리 총송나나 냥리 지고
Virtue by way of bearing is, for instance, special wholesome actions which act as the means for attaining high status or high rebirth and definite goodness. So basically, it talks about practicing the entire path of three scope of being. So because the higher high status or higher rebirth referring to the rebirth as human and God, and definite goodness referred to liberations and the state of enlightenment. So virtue by way of bearing, basically referring to referring to practicing the entire path of three scopes of being. So because by practicing the path of small scope of being, one achieves the higher rebirth, and by practicing the path of middle scope of being, one achieves liberations, and by practicing the path of great scope of being, one achieves the state of enlightenment. So basically, it refers to practicing the entire path of three scopes of being.
무두바 공부다. 그러와 공조 근념보다 샤마다. 그래서 세발라서 좀 공부하시와. 어디 단지 근념보 돈이도 비셔라 공부하시.
다리 있냐고
단지.
당진.
단지 근념보다 돈이도 비셔라 공부하시. 다 님비 겨와서 다 저 근념보 장가를 봐. 창상아 수수수 까도 잘 쳐고 다디 님보들와 님비 겨와서.
Virtue by way of acting as an antidote is, for instance, virtuous actions that possess the special power to directly destroy the objects of abandonment and the discordant class. So basically, it can apply to all sorts of instances. Like, for example, the antidote to attachment is by meditating on ugliness, and the antidote to anger is by cultivating loving kindness and patience, and the antidote to self-grasping is to cultivate the wisdom directly realizing emptiness.
다 대지라 니와시 기와스 누고 넘도 다 니와시 기와스 ngomanga suji changse sine kashi o de joke sar giwasi wada giwala no po yingurke dishi yingurwes de nikwa kesa ngomas da chumbi godin su de giwares laiba godin giware laiba 다 니와시 와서 시 니와시 와서 다 녀무 봐 시와 당지 시와 당지 빵바 세 된다 지발 와
녀무 시와
녀무 시와 녀무 빵바 와 어다 녀무 시 인터게데 고디레 도 녀무 시와 된 고디 녀무 빵바된 고디레 와 빵바는 녀무 고디레 와다 녀와 시와서 녀무 봐 녀와 시와 녀무 봐 시와 녀무 빵바 니모 빵비기와 니모바 니와시 고데 니모 빵비 고데 다 니모 빵비 타바스 다 된다 지바 그리고 니모 시 고데 니모 빵비 고데 니모 빵비 타바스 다 된다 지바 지장와 오다 니모 시 개와 스탄 고데데 개와레도 와 레도와 오데
니모 시 개와 고데 타바에네
지바 다 사모 니모 시와 니모 빵바로 와
So virtue by way of pacification is explained to be, for instance, true cessations, just as true cessations. So the virtue of pacifying afflictions and the true cessations, that is the pacifications of afflictions, and liberations, that is the abandonment of afflictions. So basically, are the instances for the virtue by way of pacification.
다들 미소와 다들 들다 다들이라 다들 수치 인도와 다 간다 다빈데 차타와서 대 녀무단데 차다 군도다 가자 참아 간다 시인고디라고 대세와데 고디데 녀무단데 차다 군도다 가자 창사배 뻔고디로와 어디 참아 뒤월 수치 인도와 간다와.
Yeah, so the meaning of this stanza, purity is separating from attachment, virtue liberating from bad migration, etc. So basically refers to the true cessations, that is the pacifications of afflictions such as anger, ignorance, and also attachment.
That the Nibada Jintibi Gawasindua, Tango de Toba de Wangishu, that nation at the Tokila Savasi, that is the Mambo Shivizi, but what some other. That is on the Shimambo Shivra. That Jintibi Seva the Kandango de Toba de Wangi, the Shui nation at the Tokila Sava, Koran and Deputy Toba. Go de Toba de Toji nation on Toba, nation of Jilacheva, Tochi Jilacheva, Derwa, the Shiva.
The virtue by way of concordant cause is, for instance, the 5 cleverances and the 10 powers that arise through the force of attaining true cessations. So this is the instance. So by attaining true cessations, then one achieved the 5 cleverances and 10 powers arise in one's mind stream. So the example for virtue by way of concordant cause.
That they got Nashi taking the Magiwala, one Jimagiwa and the Magiwa, Jason de Magiwa, Longiwa, Jandam Magiwa, Nasha.
And in relation to non-virtue, it can be divided into 5 kinds as well. So non-virtues by way of entity, by way of relation, by way of subsequent relation, by way of motivation, and by way of ultimacy.
Mon Jimagiwa so that Yamu the Name pitch or is that is Wakanda, Sani to one Wondi Magiwa Chadelwa, their Chakunda Maja, Sani to put some of them Wondi Magiwa.
So the non-virtue by way of entity are mostly the root afflictions and the secondary afflictions, for example, the 6 root afflictions.
And the Magiwa so that Yamu the Sani to what other Sundi says you sort of see you.
And non-virtue by way of relations are minds and mental factors that are concomitant with those afflictions.
That Jason de Magiwa, that Magi Pachat, that you can cheaper.
So the non-virtue by way of subsequent relation then is similar to the previous one. It's just that this one is imprints of non-virtue.
That Hoi Magiwa so that Nyamu, but that Kin handed league, the Soche, but my Jibali, but the Magzinda, Tamamo, Sorwa, Tam my legs on Giwarwa.
And non-virtue by way of motivations are the physical and verbal actions motivated by those afflictions, for example, killing, stealing, telling lies, divisive speech, etc.
That time Magiwa and Kui Magiwa, sorry, yes, Kui Magiwa.
And non-virtue by way of ultimacy are phenomena included in cyclic existence.
Then the Papa in Yuchi, me, when a turned on Magiwa Shiji, Kui Diba Tanchi, that Magiwa in by your mother. Yes, then Kui Dibi, Chetanji and the Magiwa Chawi.
So since these are the sources from which superior generate despondency or generate disgust, so they are called non-virtue by way of ultimacy. Nonetheless, it is not definite that everything included in cyclic existence is an actual non-virtue. So because of this reason, so therefore it's not definite everything included in cyclic existence is an actual non-virtue.
Koi dibe namiji fungo sachi fungo tsuyora koi dibe chere dina mugyo marwa fungo den lumat chaderwa lumaderwa game ge kama diba lumaderwa namiji fungo de mas namiji debrwa namiji debi shinje la gwa de mugyo kaya ya marwa otan koi dibe che chaderwa mas be sachi ni ne fungo yorwa o fungo namiji fungo lerwa de kana koi dibe chere dina mugyo mareswa.
Yeah. So an example for not everything included in cyclic existence is an actual non-virtue. For example, the contaminated aggregates. So these contaminated aggregates is not a non-virtue. And it is a phenomena included in phenomena. Sorry, it is a phenomena included in cyclic existence. However, it is not non-virtue. So because these contaminated aggregates that we have is neutral in nature. So because these contaminated aggregates is a ripened result, and as long as it is a ripened result, it is necessarily not any of virtue or non-virtue. So it means that it is neutral in nature. It's not virtue, it is not non-virtue as well. So it is neutral in nature. So and then similar to the previous one, so when non-virtues are divided in terms of circumstances, they are non-virtue by way of attainment at birth, by way of application, by way of activity directed in front, by way of harming, by way of bearing, by way of discordant class, and by way of interference.
Mama pasha wa pe ndiro ta kasi ngoma ngazo jeto da joju ze ni shi da ta tanda chipara ro dan chipara da kiwa ma gyo kha ja na joju da jeto se da shimba che da den ro dan chipara re do ro jeto se wa da ngazo chen de lan pe so che ko ma se wo ra ta ka chen de lan pe so mi se che ma go ba jo wa ngama gi pe pa cha da de wang ge pe chen de la pe so che la ga wa pe la sa ni ne de chi ni ge de ro le ga du je chi la pe che ni ge de ju ba le ga du ya la Yeah.
So non-virtue by way of attainment at birth is, for instance, instinctively engaging in murder through mere rebirth due to the imprints from past lives. So yeah, if you understand the explanations about the innate or the acquired at birth and through applications, then when you apply to virtue or when you apply to non-virtue, then you will be able to understand. So basically, when in this context is related to non-virtue, right? So non-virtue by way of attainment at birth, basically, one is born naturally likes to do negativities and do a non-virtuous actions. So without putting much effort in these lives, then just by the imprints from past lives, one is born naturally like to do those non-virtue. Is an example of non-virtue by way of attainment at birth. Yeah, so basically, when we talk about engaging in the actions of killing, then like to engage in those actions, then the example of non-virtue by way of attainment at birth. Yeah, so this virtue by way of attainment at birth is presented as an essential branch for introducing the virtuous and non-virtuous objects of observations without clinging to mere words. So like those non-virtuous actions mentioned in Lamrim text, then if I do one actions, then whether it becomes a virtuous or whether it becomes non-virtuous or not, as explained in Lamrim, then it's something that I'll say for us to keep in our mind and to understand whether the actions become virtuous or non-virtuous activity.
Simi 이제 공부스라 띵이 쉬이 다 고스지 예세 디샤고도와.
Yeah. A non-virtue by way of application is, for instance, misconduct of the three doors that arises in dependence on, relying on a non-virtuous spiritual friend, a spiritual guide, listening to a counterfeit doctrine, familiarizing oneself with it through improper mental engagement, and so forth.
대배 나중에 와서 영라라 마음부 쉬위 시도래 먼저 희니 된저 대배 소소 기계 컨디티 모두 내가 따지 지야다 맞을 때 나의 점은 가지 라미노 마진도 살아와 먼저 희니 된저 가도록 기계에서 와서 개체를 딱 모양에 이제 딱 개체 보시고 와 그래서 조이 먹게 와서 조이 먹게 와서 미기 희니라 때 바탕세 미기 희니라 때 바스나 소소의 기계인데 딱 기계 때 차나 때 된디 기계 때문에 내 지금 내다去 남치기 그래 숑그래 내다 하마고 때 로바 전주스의 동바단가와 소타지 동바나가 나도 동바나 기초단 가야게 벨레가 샤와 근데 제고래 세티바이나 어다때 나랑 배 게이신이래 해서 칼은니 텔레가 다가 제바이나 딱게서 사고 맞다 어떻게 게서 사고 맞대 이게 디파산 로아 디파산 뭐 먹이 신이라 때 맞아서 먹이 신이라 때 맞아 되래 단다데 말 게이 신이 때 같이 쉬사로 왔다 가서 나리 말하는 타소와 라는 타소가 쉬사로 와 오 된지 부부다 때 쳐보시 그래 또 최단하니 봐세 어때 게이 신이 때 먹이 게이 신이 때 단나서 줄로와 치아 들어가다 노바시가 들어와 단나서 들어 오다 된디니 때 쳐다니 뭐 많이 비 쳐다니 뭐 많이 비 두서배 튀는 뜻으로 때때 냐리 제기 있으네 때때서라 노조 제바이나 왔다때 간다 미게 디파상 그래 말에 기와 상요 말이스타디.
Yeah, so the instance is the misconduct of the three doors that arises in dependence on relying on a non-virtuous spiritual guide, right? So it is related to the first topic of Namrim as well. So in which we talks about the qualities of a spiritual friends, the qualities of a spiritual friends, and then we also talks about the three different types of a spiritual friends. That one that possess the highest quality, quality that possess the mediocre quality, and that possess the lesser type of quality. So therefore it's very important before we regard someone as our teacher, then it's very important to check and examine. Otherwise, if we regarded someone as our teachers already, then then that spiritual friends do not understand Dharma or do not understand Dharma correctly, and he start to teach, teach you to do teach you to do actions that is contradicted, that contradicts the bodhisattva vows. So that teach you the actions that contradicts the bodhisattva vows, and you think that, oh, he is my teacher, I regard him as my teacher already, so I have to listen to him. Then you follow his instructions, the false instructions. Then instead of accumulating roots of virtue, you only accumulate negativities. So, and listening to a counterfeit doctrine, for example, like those false doctrine, false teaching taught by the false spiritual friends, then one will not accumulate any roots of virtue.
전주스미 동바든가 동바든가 된디기 취지 소속이 년에 소속이 때가 년에 지나 디바상 그래 내 많이 봐 소속이 시나파 제발나 디바상 그래 좋아 다 고순진이지 론도와 고순진이지 오랑이 상당 담디도 생기 상당 담바이나 니지 찬 거래 디바사는 거래 나기 메바이나 네바사는 거래 리지 거래 샤와테가 제발 네바사는 거래
So any the misconduct of the three doors that arises in depending on relying on the non-virtuous spiritual friend. So if you practice the instructions given by the false spiritual teachers, then you accumulate non-virtue, you accumulate negativities. And if you were to verbally explain it to others, or share it to others, then also become a non-virtue. And mentally, you think about the meaning of those false instructions, then again, that becomes accumulations of negativities as well.
다들은 닌도 샤이 먹여서 로고도 다 다시 공동 가서 다다 된 로를 상방신에 다 닌도 샤이 겨와서 다시 공도 주셔서와 다 닌도 샤이 먹여서 다 기신이 로발틴이다 다 다기 되는 기신 로발틴이 리발틴이 배 신체스토치니 배 차고 주바 피브레스 소신이라 다 소신이라 그들이 차고 주바 피는 되게다가 지금 사는 게 되게 배 무슨 소리들이 제바이나 that doesn't need to shame give that differs out
And in relation to the second point, relying on this non-virtuous spiritual guide, then the non-virtue by way of activity directed in front also arise. For instance, offering a blood sacrifice to an image due to adhering to harmfulness as a doctrine independent on being deceived by a perverse spiritual guide. So you rely on a non-virtuous spiritual guide, then give false instructions, you listen, then you kill sentient beings, and then you make a blood sacrifice. Then those are the non-virtue. So the next one is non-virtue by way of harming. For instance, actions harming sentient beings and actions harming oneself as well by way of body, speech, and mind. So physically killing, stealing, etc. Speech, then you verbally telling lies, divisive speech, etc. And mind, then covetousness and harmful intentions, etc.
다 이제 동안 마시 이 페이지에 조직이 됐다고 했다. 이제 가서 용수집에 제보라니 타송과가 샤사이마다 이러와 용수집이 개와 들어와. 다 단다데 용수집이 메고서 단 이제 동안 마시 이제 동안 데마도 유학 내가 마도 다시 페이지 조직 내 간이나 데마도 시 마시게 들어와. 다 간다. 배 토시지는 만냐미지 받아서 가wan 로그나 이제 동안 중요하지 내지 마도. 와 de pijile zoji kani dichimoto this masawa dila ta yonsu jibe mekewa siderwa
Non-virtue by way of bearing. So just now when we talk about the virtue by way of bearings, then we talk about the path of three scopes of being, right, or the virtue of three scopes of being. So when we come to non-virtue by way of bearing is, for instance, projecting and completing actions which you only suffering results. So which you only suffering results in samsara. So from the very peak of the samsara down to the lowest hell.
다 문디쇼지 먹여와서 데려와 다 문디쇼는 사미지 랑치 계시 따와게 봐. 다 따와게 봐 가서 배 사미지 랑 동반인 것은 또 배 줄에 제와라 줄에 제우디 사미지 랑 줄에 제로 봐.
거기에
동반인 것은 또 이시대 동반인 것도 비시대 토마 줄에 제우게 그 사미지 랑데 토마 제버려 간다. 사미지 랑데 토마 제버려. 다 데라페 바치 징게 쪼도 가르스나 바치 징게 쪼 다 다트만 징게 다 이제 따와때 때 자천부 쉬고 지따와는 바데 따와때 데 자천부 배 쉬고 이제 바데 까마도 바이나 더 사미르체 두고요 말 사미지나 돈링스도 따와때 지레체 두고요 말 다다도 좁바데 배 따와 데레 하든 문도 우사 다도 좁만 지니게 들어와 오다디 따와는 바딜라서 다 나서 따와가 일이와 쉬워 되게 언지다 다다시요 오다도 수 상황에 간다 같이 지고와 사미랑 지레체 같이 지고.
So non-virtue by way of discordant class is, for instance, bad views that hinder the generations of uncontaminated paths. So bad views such as view of transitory collections, view clinging to the extremes, etc. So these bad views will hinder the generations of uncontaminated paths in one's mind stream. So the first, So when wisdom directly realizing emptiness arise in one's mind stream, that is the first moment the uncontaminated paths arise in one's mind stream. So the generations of wisdom directly realizing emptiness is the first moment that path of the path of so it's the first moment, because it's the first time that uncontaminated paths arise in oneself, arise in one's mind stream.
다 봐도 지금 몇 개와서 인도와 다들 담아 다들 게이쇼 샤와 탕지라 봐도 지기래서 들에 다 대하노 봐도 지금 몇 개와서나 소소게 리가 있어게 ngāki pē gyāwā chīgō na, tē kāndā ngāki pē jīn chōma chīdī shīdāwa ina, tē ngāki gyāwā shībāla pāshīrwa.
Tāwa ngē mā nīgō mā rōi.
Tā tē mā chānsāla shāni kūrwa, bāta chīdī gyāwā tē, tā līchī pē chānsāla sōba, sōgī pē bāta chīgē tē, tā līchī kōne tē bāta, sīnchī rāngi rā pēnē bā chīgā tsōrwa. Tā līchī kōne pē gyāwā tē duwala, tā bāta chīgē nā sīnī sīlā sōba tsōgī kūrwa. 사마르다 와도 집에 겨워서 리마 예순가게 기와 두발아 같이 챙겨들 원다 간다 리마 예순가게 기와 두발아 같이 챙겨 어디
And the last one is non-virtue by way of interference is, for instance, bad views that interfere with all classes of virtue. So basically, anything that interfere interfere with all classes of virtue are the example for this one, non-virtue by way of interferences. So it can be bad views, or it can be physical actions, or it can be verbal actions as well, such as telling lies, etc.
다 봐도 집에 먹여와 세와데 간다 기 샤워 랑게 기 샤워 두발아 봐도 집에 세와 미 현다게 기 샤워 두발아 봐도 징게 니가 참아 보는 거다 좋아 미 같이 징게 소소게 기 샤워 두발아 같이 징게 미 현다게 고야 부지제 냥리야 부지가 들라 같이 징게 어다 참아 랑게 니가 잡으라고.
So non-virtue by way of interference is bad, for example, is bad views that interfere with all classes of virtue, right? So in relation to oneself and in relation to others as well. So not only that it interferes oneself from accomplishing those classes of virtue, and it also interfere others accomplishing the classes of virtue as well.
Yeah, that ring on the months and doing the jail. Yeah, the Portland generation so I am Canola Penroa. The teaching Kanda Dimatis, 3 months on Israel. Then the Gemma some go to the Zania to Hollywood.
Yeah. So today I cover quite many of pages because next week we do not have class, and Kandula will be visiting LDC. So next class, I'm going to start with 6 root afflictions.
Yeah. That ring on the day and more shy that was not similar.
Yes, I'm going to stop here.
I'm also getting it or the Latin that you think about the that and up near the Mantula of the deep watch yet that mount to the near DG, Sinjit said, and this is a several 2 minutes of the deeper panic, Sanji to combine you the Dilapa watch is one.
So we conclude with dedication. We dedicate the roots of virtue accumulated, especially through these Dhamma discussions. I dedicate these roots of virtue for the flourishing of Buddha Dharma and for the happiness of sentient beings. I also dedicate these roots of virtue for world peace, and may happiness prevail the world. May the world be free of wars, conflicts, disaster, etc. And may those who pass away, especially in the pandemic and wars and conflict, then may they quickly achieve the state of enlightenment, and may their negativities accumulated since speaking less time be pacified immediately. May those who suffer, especially in the pandemic and in wars and conflict, may they quickly be freed from their sufferings.
Dagi Junior Zabi Giwadi Dinang Roa Kuna Kame Nang Shiva Jizu Lozan Dama Yimini Morindo Seju
Senjo Rinpoche Ma Chepa Na Kiryu Che Chepa Nyamba Pepa Yang Kone Kondo Pewa Sho Bawe Chita Chenpa Na Kudo Sambo Te Yang Te Shin Te Te Ta Kundi Chesu Talo Che Kewa Te Ta Tam Che Ra Do Mo Tawa Rinpoche Ma Chepa Na Kiryu Che Chepa Nyamba Pepa Yang Kone Kondo Pewa Sho Rimni Tawa Rinpoche Kiryu Che Chepa Nyamba Pepa Yang Kone Kondo Pewa Sho Changjin Jangwe Kewe Ten Sikyo Pewe Kusho Tumbo Se Shosu Kuwe Le Me Tutu Ba Dazo Tuje Kendo Shaten Sho Sundo Jube Lang Chi Se 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 Kanche Chen Yue Ge Chana Pimo Tenzi Gato La Soa De So Shen De Le Do Jo Ale Pende Man Yu Ba Kale Jungwe Sampe Ishin No Katin Tsume Tenzi Gato La Soa De So Tu Shen Le Do Jo Kange Kowe Shin Kan De Penda De Wa Ma Lu Chungwe De Chire Simo Tenzi Gato Shabe Si De Ba Do Deng Yu Ji
Oh yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you, Kishala.
Thank you, Geshe-la.